Anger, closure, desperation, fear, flattery, happiness, pity, ridicule, shame, spite, trust. Let's just say emotion. People believe things because of emotional appeal. It would be great if this were true, or it would be bad if this were false. Does that say anything about whether it is true or false? No, of course not, and that makes appeal to emotion a fallacy. A generalized appeal to emotion would be, premise 1, if X is true/false, you will experience emotion Y. Premise 2, you wish to experience/avoid emotion Y. Conclusion, therefore X is true/false. Of course, the conclusion doesn't follow, because what you wish to experience or wish to avoid has nothing to do with what's actually true. Thinking that your desires determine or reveal what's true or false is just wishful thinking, which is also a fallacy. On that note, the dumbest argument for the existence of God I've ever heard is the argument from desire, which goes, Premise 1. For every innate and natural desire, there exists a state of affairs that fulfills that desire. Premise 2. Humans have an innate natural desire for ultimate joy, which nothing in this world can fulfill. Conclusion 1. Therefore, there exists something beyond this world which can fulfill that desire. Definition, we call that something God. Conclusion 2. Therefore, God exists. Premise 1 is of course just wishful thinking, unless we make the argument circular by adding that innate and natural desires can be fulfilled by definition. In that case, the only way we could count the desire for ultimate joy as natural and innate is if that desire could be fulfilled, which happens to be the first conclusion of the argument. But to get back to appeals to emotion, theists are fond of those as well. For example, watch Passion of the Christ. There's no way you'll be an atheist after you see what Jesus had to endure. This is an appeal to pity. Let's set aside the fact that I found the scourging scene and everything after that point comical. It was like one of those jokes in Family Guy where they just drag something out to the point that it stops being funny, but then they keep going until you start laughing at the fact that the joke is still going. Say that I had actually felt sympathy for the Jesus character. This would in no way address the issue of whether the story is true or not. I felt pity for Theon Greyjoy, but that doesn't mean I think Game of Thrones is for real. How a story makes me feel is one thing, whether it's true or not is a completely separate thing. Pascal's wager relies on this fallacy as well. If Christianity is true and you don't believe, you'll burn in hell for all eternity. If it's not true but you believe anyway, you lose nothing, you just die. Therefore, you should believe just to be on the safe side. One major problem with this is that the same argument could be made for different, mutually incompatible religions, and you'd have to believe all of them despite the fact that they contradict each other. But the one that's relevant here is that it's an appeal to fear. In no way does it follow from my desire not to be tortured forever that there actually is such a thing as hell, or a God that could or would send me there for not believing in him. How I feel about the idea of hell is one thing. Whether it actually exists or not is another. Of course, Winston Wu commits this fallacy, specifically appeal to pity. At least he might be, and considering his track record, I don't think a charitable interpretation is warranted. Quote, of course, just because someone genuinely believes something doesn't make it true, but to compare an honest person to a deliberate fraud is not a valid comparison. Unquote. Indeed, but this is stated in a context where no one is actually calling anyone a fraud. He's addressing the idea of comparing paranormal phenomena to fictional ones. The point of that comparison is to show that if I should believe one thing for which there is no evidence, then I should believe in fictional things as well, because there's no evidence for them either. Now, I could be reading too much into this, but if I'm right, Wu is basically saying that if someone genuinely believes something, then we should take them at their word. They no longer have a burden of proof, because by asking them to prove what they're saying, we're calling them frauds, and that's insulting them. Well, tough. Being offended by my skepticism does not rid them of their burden of proof. If this is what Wu means, then he is appealing to pity. I should believe something not because it's true, but because by believing it, I will spare someone else's feelings. Far too often, people are emotionally invested in their beliefs. That's bad. And sadly, I think it's hard to avoid. It's human. I think the best we can do is recognize it. Even if you are emotionally invested in some belief, you need to acknowledge that this doesn't in any way make that belief accurate. And most importantly, you need to accept that because of that, you can't use the emotional appeal of the belief as an argument for it. That would be like dishonest advertising. How attractive the models in the commercial are has nothing to do with whether I should buy the product. Do your best to separate your feelings from your beliefs. Stay logical.